Hola comrades, in today's video we take a look at something of an emotive subject. It's a minibus, but it's not just any minibus, it's the second purpose-built minibus ever made. And there is no doubt that it deserves its place within the classic bus archives. So what is this marvellous miniature motor? It's the MCW and Optare Metrorider. Join me for a noisy and rattly journey back to 1986 when the MCW Metro Rider was launched. Now, over the years, those of you who've been following this channel for a long time will have heard me use the expression "it's a bit like Marmite" various times previously. And minibuses, of course, are one of those things that are like Marmite. You either love them or you hate them. You're either one of these people that turn around and go, "Oh no, not a bread van, I hate those things." Or you say that they played an important part in bringing passengers back onto the buses by serving estates and roads and routes that big buses just couldn't physically get down. In fact, I don't think I've actually ever heard anybody say they don't mind minibuses. It is always one extreme or the other. I've never heard anybody say, "Do you know what, I actually don't mind a full transit," or "I quite like Sherpas." It always seems to be one extreme or the other. There are many of us who associate the minibus with the immediate pre-deregulation and immediate post-deregulation bus scene, where companies such as Devon General say were running vast fleets of full transits on high-frequency routes. But it's fair to say that the minibus has its roots much earlier than this. Now, just for clarification, when I'm talking about minibuses, I'm talking about public service vehicles that are suitable for stage work and potentially coach work as well. So however much we like a Bedford CA with Dormobile conversion, I probably won't be mentioning them on this particular video. Now also, this isn't going to be a history on the minibus type either, but all I will say is that they've been around in small numbers in the 1960s, vehicles like the Bedford J2 for example, which tends to be more Midi coach than anything else, and again the CF, which was another model from Bedford. Incidentally, as a rule, minibuses tend to have the engine at the front, and initially were of some kind of fan derivative. But as we're about to find out, that isn't necessarily the strict rule as it may seem. In the late 60s and early 1970s, minibus tended to mean full transit. However, in the late 1970s, when the Dodge 50 series was introduced, this brought another competitor into the market. Likewise, the Freight Rover, which had been launched as the Sherpa in 1974, didn't really start to take off as a PSV minibus until the early 1980s. And the only reason it became popular was because the flow of full transits had dried up and there was still a huge demand for similar sized vehicles. For as many ways as the minibuses proved unpopular, they also proved very popular. As I mentioned previously, they helped boost frequencies on routes. You could use 20 full transits on a service instead of 3 double-decker buses and increase the frequency. They also were cheaper to run, and more often than not, the drivers were paid a lot less than their big bus colleagues, and in a lot of cases they were taken on especially to drive these minibuses and were therefore employed with new terms and conditions. And as I said earlier, the minibus could fit into all sorts of places that big buses just couldn't hope to reach. Housing estates, small country lanes, even shopping precincts, and hospital car parks. In fact, the minibuses were proving so popular that operators started looking to increase the size of them. Now, there is one problem with the van-based minibus, such as the full transit or the Sherpa, for example. The time you build the bodywork on them, normally by, say, Dormobile or Alexander or Carlisle, the gross unladen weight of the vehicle was creeping up, and most of these original minibuses could seat 16 passengers, as well as a few more standing. So this was pushing the weight of the vehicle to the maximum operating weight of the mechanical components of the minibus design. Now, as a rule of thumb, I was always taught that it's 15 people to the ton, unless of course they're Americans, when it's a lot less. But most of these van-based minibuses would have had a payload limit of around 3.5 tons, which, the time you take into account things like seats, bodywork and fittings, and then the weight of the passengers, that doesn't leave an awful lot of margin left for anything else, does it? So these vehicles could be in use all day, every day, carrying the maximum capacity of weight that they're designed to carry, working very hard for a living, in other words. Now, this tends to wear things out, like mechanical components, suspension units and brakes. What was needed was something that was the size of a minibus, but had the heavy-duty components that the bus industry knew and loved. In 1985, Optare had launched their Citypacer, which was a custom-built minibus body on a Volkswagen LT55 chassis. And although by then the LT55 was rated at 5.6 tonnes gross weight, it was still a van chassis. It did break from the norm though. Instead of using the chassis cab combination that the manufacturer supplied, such as the full transits and the Sherpas, this was a completely new designed bodywork and looked totally different to any delivery van on the road at that time. Now, I think that's something that we've all done when we've been waiting for a minibus and we've held down a parcel horse van. But there was none of that with this baby. Now, also around this time, MCW were looking at increasing their output from their factory at Washford Heath in Birmingham. Over the previous couple of decades, MCW had gone from being just a bodybuilder on bus chassis through to being a builder of integral and semi-integral vehicles. I'm going to leave the story of MCW up to my friend here, AI Al. Take it away, Al.
Metro Camel Wayman Limited, MCW, was a British bus manufacturer and bus bodybuilder based at Washford Heath in Birmingham, England. MCW was established in 1932 by Metro Camel's bus bodybuilding division and Wayman Motor Bodies to produce bus bodies.
Thanks, Al. That was great. Both Metro Camel and Wayman had been building bus bodywork for many years on many hallowed vehicle types such as Leyland Titans and AC Regents. In fact, Wayman had built many of the bodies for the RT type buses, the predecessor to the well-known AC Routemaster at London Transport, while Metro Camel bodied some of the RTLs and all of the RF single-decker type buses, also for London Transport. They'd also bodied some of the first Leyland Atlanteans to roll off the production line too. In the late 1960s, they'd gone into partnership with Scania, and this had resulted in the Metro Scania single-decker bus, followed very closely by the double-decker equivalent, the Metropolitan. However, by 1977, MCW decided to go it alone with the integral, or should I say semi-integral, MCW Metro bus. Now, I have done a video on the MCW Metro bus, and I will try and put a little link to that video up in the top right hand corner for you to watch at your leisure. By the early 1980s, MCW had diverged a little bit from the Metro bus and were also building a high specification luxury coach, and this would be the MCW Metrorider. And you know what I'm going to say, yes, I have done a video about that too, and I will try and link that video in with this video. Now, as I said, MCW were looking at expanding their products, and in 1986 this would see the launch of the MCW Metro Rider, an integral Midi bus design. And incidentally, around this time they also launched the MCW Metro Cab, another make and model that's rather close to my heart. As you are watching this video, Melissa's MCW Metro Cab, known as Fred, will have just gone for its MOT, so we were waiting with bated breath to find out exactly how it's done. Fingers crossed, everybody. Now again, this Midi bus didn't look like anything else that was on the road at that time. And I know people will say that the first minibus that was designed completely as a minibus was the Optare Citypacer, but as I said, That had the chassis of a van, the Volkswagen LT55. The MCW Metro Rider, on the other hand, was completely designed from the drawing board on the outset as a bus. It was available in several lengths, and those were 7 metres or 8.4 metres. The 7 metre version being what's regarded as the standard version of the Metro Rider, and this would seat around 25 seats, depending on the configuration, the longer version seating up to 33 seats, again depending on the configuration. There were also 2 widths to choose from as well, 2.2 metres or 2.376 metres, which doesn't sound an awful lot of difference until you convert it over to imperial, when it becomes 7 foot 2.6 inches or 7 foot 9.5 inches. And there are many people who will say that 7 inches matters an awful lot. Now, originally the Perkins Phaser ZF manual driveline was offered on the Metro Rider, but very quickly the most popular option became the Cummins B Series engine driving through an Allison fully automatic gearbox. The Cummins B Series being a 5.9 litre diesel engine developing 115 brake horsepower. There was also an option for a Cummins turbocharged engine too. Now, unlike many minibuses or Midi buses at the time, the Metro Rider had air brakes. The shorter models ran on drum brakes, while the longer models ran on disc brakes. And the brakes were very efficient, shall we say. Now, as I mentioned before, these looked nothing like any other minibus or Midi bus on the road at that time, maybe with the exception of the Optare Citypacer that I mentioned previously. A bit like the Citypacer, the Metro Rider had a huge raked back windscreen, giving it almost a streamlined cheese wedge appearance at the front end. There were large side windows which let the light in and allowed passengers who were standing to see where they were going. A complaint about many of the minibuses at the time being that they were claustrophobic and could be rather gloomy inside with the brown or grey soft trim that many of them seemed to be fitted with. Being purpose-built as a bus meant that there was no van chassis underneath that bodywork, van chassis tending to be a little bit higher due to their very nature of being designed to carry goods rather than passengers. On the MCW Metro Rider, of course, this would allow shallower steps, a wider entrance and gangway, and improved headroom as the floor could be a little bit lower. The bodywork was manufactured by steel box section welded together. Now, one of the things about the Metro Rider was that it was a bit of an assortment of bits and bobs from other manufacturers' vehicles. You see, it seemed that MCW had been round raiding the skips and bins of other companies that made vehicles. And this, to some extent, is also true about the MCW Metro Cab too. The dashboard and steering wheel came from the Ford Cargo lorry range, whilst, like the Metro Cab, the original rear lights came from the Mark IV Ford Escort Cabriolet. The first 2 MCW Metro Riders would appear in October 1986 and would be registered D482NOX and D483NOX. The bus would be launched at the 1986 British International Motor Show in Birmingham, which was held in October. At the show, MCW announced that it had won £3 million worth of orders for the vehicle, and this would be 2 months before it was due to go into production as well, so that sounded like a really good start, didn't it? In fact, the managing director of MCW, Peter Stedman, was quoted as saying he was very happy with the way it was going. These orders would transpire to be from operators such as GM Buses, Midland Scottish, who would take the first 4 production vehicles, West Midlands Travel, Blackburn, London Buses, Wilts And Dorset, as well as some for smaller fleets such as Skills of Nottingham, Ray of Harrogate and Wilson of Port Glasgow, to name a few. Production soon got underway, and by January 1987 the buses were starting to materialise and be delivered to their operators. The first ones going to West Midlands Travel in January 1987 and February 1987 as D602NOE and D603NOE. Now, on paperwork, the West Midlands buses were dual purpose, but looking at them, they seem to have standard bus seats in them. So I don't really think that's right. Again, they were finished in the attractive blue and silver with a red stripe livery that West Midlands was using for its minibus fleet at the time. These were preceded in build number by the Midland Scottish ones, D647 GLS to D650 GLS, but these weren't delivered until March 1987. And of course there was an earlier West Midlands one, D601 NOE, but again this was delivered in February 1987. The Midland Scottish vehicles were given the attractive blue and cream Bluebird livery and were fitted with coach seats. The MCW Metro Rider found itself going into an even wider range of companies. Dublin Bus, Yorkshire Traction, Northumbria, City of Oxford, Hyndburn, Yorkshire Rider, Strathclyde, Yorkshire Traction, Ulster Bus, Great Yarmouth, Cheltenham and Gloucester, Jubilee of Stevenage. I could just keep going on and on, reading out companies which operated these things. In London, they entered service in June 1987 at Kingston, wearing the well-known livery of Westlink. Here they would operate on the K1, the K2 and the K3 routes. These pioneer buses would be MR1 to MR22, and later they would be joined by MR134, which was a former demonstrator. 3 months later, in September 1987, 30 were delivered for Harrow buses, and oddly enough, being Harrow buses, they were delivered to Walworth, which is in the South London by Camberwell, in case you don't know. However, these buses were soon moved on to Harrow Weald or Edgware, before being moved to North Wembley, where they operated from. They were painted in Harrow buses' red, cream and black livery, these buses being MR23 to MR52. Bexley Bus was another operator of the Metro Rider, taking a dozen in December 1987, which arrived in the blue and cream Bexley Bus livery. At the same time, 10 longer Metro Riders arrived at Orpington, where they operated on the roundabout services. Over the next few years, many more MRs and MRLs would enter service with London Buses and their subsidiaries. But by this time, MCW were in trouble. By 1989, the parent company of MCW, the Laird Group, had decided to sell its bus and rail divisions. While Metro Camel's rail division and the Washford Heath factory went to GEC Altham, the bus manufacturing side of the business wasn't quite as lucky, and each product was sold separately to the various companies who were interested in them. The Metroliner, the Metro Bus and the Metro Rider were bought by Optare, them of the Citypacer fame, who I've mentioned several times in this video already. The irony was that Optare was formed from the former Charlie Rowe factory in Leeds, which had been a Leyland subsidiary and had therefore been, at one point, direct competition for MCW. Altogether, there were 1,054 of the original MCW Metro Riders built, the last one numerically being F171DET for BTS of Borehamwood, which was delivered in May 1989. The first two Optare Metro Riders appeared in November 1989 for Kentish Bus, which was registered G866TCU, and for Ipswich, which was registered G221VDX. Externally, there was very few differences between the MCW product and the Optare product. However, under the skin, Optare made a few changes. The short wheelbase Metro Riders received a heavier duty rear axle. They also received the disc brakes that the larger buses had as well. In fact, Optare offered a conversion kit for people with the earlier MCW Metro Riders to convert their buses to this newer specification with these disc brakes and new rear axles. The name was also slightly altered too. Instead of being Metro Rider with a capital M and the rest in lowercase, it became Metro Rider with a large capital M and a large capital R. Nowadays, of course, you would pay a design consultancy millions of pounds and they'd just do everything in lowercase, wouldn't they? There would be 1,159 Metro Riders built in Leeds by Optare. Over the years, Optare subtly changed the design of the exterior so it matched more in with the likes of their Delta, Spectra and Vector buses. When Optare took over, they had planned to produce 200 vehicles a year depending on demand. The last few Metro Riders were built in Leeds in early 2000, with the last two being delivered to Henderson of Hamilton in April 2000. These being W425 CWX and W426 CWX. In that same year, the successor to the Metro Rider, the Optare Solo, started to appear. But there's some who would say the Solo isn't a proper minibus, or indeed midibus, because the engine's at the rear. Now, that's not to say that the Solo's a bad bus, but it's just to say that it's different. And I might do a video on Solos because they do get a lot of stick in the enthusiast press, and they're actually not too bad of buses to drive, if I'm honest. Anyone that's ever driven an Optare Star Rider will tell you there's a lot worse buses than a Solo. Now, although the Metro Rider was an integrally built bus and couldn't be bodied by other body manufacturers, it was sold abroad in kit form. This obviously serving two reasons. Shipping was a lot cheaper for a kit, and it gave somebody a job in the destination country. Countries such as Malaysia benefited from these kit-built buses. From 1993 and predating the current craze for electric vehicles, there was an electric version of the Metro Rider in production for going into service with Oxford Bus Company. And there were two CNG, compressed natural gas powered buses built for Stagecoach Canvas in Cambridge. Many Metro Riders saw many years of hard work, later passing from their original owners to new second-hand owners, if that makes sense, where again they proved to be invaluable workhorses. The only thing it seemed that marred the Metro Riders was their ability to corrode. Like anything that seems to be built in either Birmingham or Leeds, there must have been a part of the production line where the tin worm was added into the structure. And that box section that the bodywork and framework was built out of that I mentioned earlier had a rather nasty tendency to crumble away into nothing. So now I'm going to hand it all over to you, dear viewer. I'd love to hear your recollections, your memories, your thoughts on the MCW and the Optare Metro Rider in the comments down below. Now I'm going to start the ball rolling. I've had quite a lot to do with these buses in the early days of my career. Originally at Peckham we had the dreaded SR class Mercedes-Benz Star Riders, and maybe I'm being a bit harsh on them, but at the time they were pretty crap. These were all replaced by MRLs that came over from Stockwell, the MRL of course being the long wheelbase Metro Rider, the Optare variety. Yes, they could be noisy, and in the summertime you literally could fry an egg in the cab. But after an SR they seemed to be an absolute dream to drive, helped an incredible amount by the high driving position. Fast forward to 2003 when I joined Eastern Ways as a manager, running a network of routes around the Isle of Thanet and beyond. The majority of the vehicles that we ran at the time were the Metro Riders, and again these were the Optare variety. These coming from a variety of sources, Arriva and London. Sadly, most of them crumbled away to nothing, although at least one provided the running gear for one of the Dennis Darts that we had. I believe it was either H127 THE or H120 THE that had needed a new engine and gearbox, and both Dennis and Cummins, I believe, as well as potentially I think Optare, said that the swap couldn't be done. But Terry, Stuart and Martin, the fitters at Eastern Ways, took the engine and gearbox in one unit out of the MRL, turned it around and plumbed it into the Dennis Dart without too much pain or agony, proving that indeed it could be done. Now I don't know if any other operators did this little trick, but it certainly saved an awful lot of time and, more importantly, money. So hey, look at that, we've reached the end of the Metro Rider story. I really hope you enjoyed this video, even if you're not a fan of mini or midi buses. But without a doubt, these played a huge part in the industry. especially, as I said right at the beginning, in that post-deregulation buscape. And when it came to small buses, you can't deny that they raised the bar an awful lot. And it seems that this video about a small bus has gone on a little bit longer than I anticipated, so I do apologise for that, and I hope you're still awake. Now, if you did enjoy this video, please do me a favour, like and share it, because it shows the YouTube algorithm that somebody's actually watched this video and enjoyed it, and that helps the channel grow. Also, as I said earlier, don't forget to put your comments down below about your memories and your interactions with the Metro Rider bus, whether you travelled on it as a passenger, you drove on it, or you had your head well and truly stuck in the oily end. Whatever your connection, I love reading about them down below, and I do try and reply to all of your comments. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my future releases in this and my other series here on YouTube. There's several different playlists running at the moment. Please feel free to have a little look back at the older videos and see if there's anything there that floats your boat. Talking of boats, did you know that some Metro Riders were actually sold to New Zealand at some point? I can imagine all that time as deck cargo on a container ship must have really helped the corrosion problem. Anyway, thank you ever so much for watching. Bye for now.